Chapter 47, exactly the opposite. "Oh no," screamed Prisha. "Oh no, Sanjay, swim out, save our child." "Our child can swim, Prisha, you know that. We have paid for him to have extra lessons. You should swim out and save him anyway." But while they were arguing, Raoul had emerged from the water, which wasn't that deep where he was anyway, so he could still stand, and had bent down by the car and put his arm into the water. He was turning something. The crank on the front of the bonnet near the Taylor 1 number plate. The one that turned the Taylor Turbochaser in a tent. "Press the TP button, Amy," he shouted. Amy did that as instructed. The parents and the police stared, baffled, as suddenly reams of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat style material came flooding out of the chimney in the middle of the vehicle. And indeed, you might be baffled too, as to what Raoul was doing. But if you remember, making the car into a tent also spread the underside of the Turbochaser out, and the underside of the Turbochaser was lined with air-filled mattresses. So suddenly, the Taylor Turbochaser was floating. The sheer momentum of the heavy vehicle caused it to carry on further into the lake. "Ha, that's amazing," said Amy. "It's a boat," shouted Jack. "It's a ferry," shouted Jeanette. "It's," said Raoul, climbing back through the cat flap, "the turbo dinghy." "One problem," said Amy. "We're floating." "Well done, but we're not moving," and she looked round. "I think the police and our parents might be deciding to come after us." DCI Bryant and PC Middleton were indeed back on shore, putting on the waterproof and big plastic knee-length waders. PC Middleton was having a lot of trouble doing this and had ended up on the ground on his bottom with his legs in the air, while Colin and Norma tried to wedge the waders onto his feet. "Push, Norma! Push, Colin! We're pushing! Get on with it, Middleton!" "I told the police store I was an 8.5, sir. These are definitely 8s. Susie, meanwhile, wasn't bothered with waders. Amy watched as her mum simply peeled off her jacket and dived into the water and then began to swim. Amy felt a pang of guilt about that, but she had to go to Scotland. She just turned to Raoul and said, "We need to go faster." Her mum had settled into her front crawl and was moving quickly into the lake after them. "Okay," said Raoul, "I have an idea for that too. For how to move the car. Press the hazards." "The hazards?" "Yes." Amy pressed the button. The red flag popped out off the back of the left-hand side car. "Okay, there's a second button next to it. Press that one too." She did so. A second red flag popped out of the red right-hand side of the car. So now there were two big flaps flapping in the wind at the back of the car. "What are they doing?" said PC Middleton, in the shallow water of the edge of the lake. "Are they telling us they're in trouble?" "Right," said Raoul. "Jack, Janet, stick your hands out of the cat flaps and grab the bottom end of the flags." They did so. "Got them!" "Yes," said Jack. "Yes," said Jeanette. "Okay, now pull them tight." They did. The flags stopped flapping and became taut. And as that happened, the Taylor Turbo dinghy started to move fast. "The flags, they've become snails," said Amy. "Yes, Raoul." "You're a genius, Raoul," said Jack. "Now I know you're being sarcastic." "I'm definitely not," said Jack, laughing. Raoul hit the radio. "We are sailing," came a song blasting through the speakers. "Although how long do we have to hold on to these?" said Jeanette. "My hands are freezing." They swept across the lake in the turbo dinghy. Susie, still swimming after them, dwindled into tininess as they left her behind. Soon she stopped swimming and turned back to shore. In the shallows, watching the children sail away in the distance, Prisha looked at PC Middleton and said, "In answer to your question, no, I don't think they're telling us they're in trouble. In fact, I think they're telling us exactly the opposite. Chapter 48, a nice-looking restaurant. Oh, well, said Susie, at least we know where they're headed. Well, not exactly, said Prisha. It's a huge lake. We've no idea which bit of the shore they might land on. What about sending out a boat, said Norma to DCI Brian. Boaty McBoatface, you mean, said Colin. Shh, Colin said. You're no fun anymore, said Colin sulkily. We've radioed for it, Miss Warner, but I'm afraid there are no police boats available unless it's an emergency. It's an emergency! Not if their craft is sinking, apparently. Which last time I saw it, it very much wasn't. No, but I mean, said Susie, at least we know where they're going in general, because once they're across the lake, it's only a few miles to Scotland. So you think, said Sanjay, they're definitely trying to get to Amy's dad. Susie paused. She had a change of her wet clothes into some trousers and a jumper provided by Colin, who, in case of accidents, something Susie did not want to think about, always travelled with a spare pair. They were much too big for her, and the cuffs of his jumper kept falling into the food she was trying to eat. Because the parents and police, who themselves were hungry and tired, had decided to discuss what to do over dinner, she had turned round and driven back to a nice-looking restaurant they'd passed earlier. Yes, I mean, he's the one who paid for the new wheelchair. Isn't he also the one, said Prisha, who's furious because of Raoul has done to the new wheelchair? Yes, but I guess Amy thinks she can turn him around. Prisha looked at her. Is he the type of man who gets turned around? Susie stared into her glass of water. She shook her head. I'm the type of man who gets turned around, said Colin, getting up and whizzing around the circle, ending up facing Norma. Norma shook her head. Sorry, Colin, not appropriate. Oh, said Colin. Amy, continued Susie, she really loves her dad. Kind of idolises him. Thinks he's perfect. It's easier to seem perfect when you're not there, said Prisha, looking away. Yes, said Susie. I mean, he is a good dad in some ways, but, well, the accident, the one that left Amy unable to walk, Peter, my husband, was driving, I mean. He didn't do anything wrong. It was an accident, but still, I think he blamed himself. And he's so, well, I think it's been able to accept Amy in a wheelchair. Prisha nodded. Sanjay was quiet. Colin made a gesture that meant, shall I whiz round again? Norma shook her head. Anyway, we split up soon afterwards, so I don't know. It's bad enough that we're having to chase her and the others up and down the country, but I'm not even sure that her plan to change Peter's mind is going to work. Oh dear, said Prisha. Yes, it gets worse. I spoke to him just now and he said, not pleased at all, that if we couldn't catch the kids, he was going to organise something else. What's something else? Said Sanjay. I don't know, but it sounded ominous. She put her glasses down. No one said anything for a moment. Then a voice. Madame, would you like the bill? Or is there anything we can get for you? Everyone looked up. Louis was twiddling his moustache and smiling. Prisha said, non tout, merci. And Louis said, pardon? But not in a French accent. Chapter 49. Mobiblicon XR207 located. A bump woke Amy up, then another bump. She opened her eyes slowly. Looking back at her were two very big brown eyes. Then they got further away. They came back again. Then they got further away again. At this point, Amy's own vision cleared from sleep. The two very big brown eyes were joining by a twitching nose and very big grey ears. As the sight started to get closer again, Amy shouted, Hey, I think we've hit land. somewhere near the Teletubbies live. Say what? Said Raoul sleepily. There's a huge rabbit outside, said Amy. So unless it's a rabbit fish, we must have got across the lake overnight. After they'd set off from the opposite shore, the movement of the Turbochaser had slowed down a lot. It was difficult for Jack and Jeanette to hold on to the flags for too long, so they'd keep on stopping to give their arms a rest. Eventually, Raoul had found a way of pinning them to the outside of the cat flaps. The flags, that is, not Jack and Janet, so that they could continue to work as sails without the need for hands to hold them tight. But it was going slow and night had begun to fall. What shall we do? Amy said, in between munching. They're drifting and she couldn't really steer on the water. So the children had decided to have dinner, beans obviously. Well, said Raoul, looking around, the inside was all spread out and they were protected by the tent material. Although presently the turbo dinghy, it also was the turbo tent, so we could all just sleep in it. On the lake? Well, yes, it's safe, said Jeanette. Sleeping on the lake? Obviously not, said Jack, but it has been okay so far on this trip. They had all thought about this for a bit and decided that for once Jack had something sensible. And so, as soon as the beans had been eaten, they all went to bed. The slow movement of the waves and the lake rocked them all gently to sleep, until the rabbit alarm clock movement. All the children woke up excited to see the rabbits. It was very early in the morning. It was bright and cold on the edge of the lake, but there was something joyful and wonderful in having made it through another night. And then being woken up by enormous rabbits, which didn't run away or anything, just looked at the children as they appeared, its nose twitching away. I'm not sure it's a rabbit, said Jack. Yes, it might be a hare, said Raoul. It's obviously not a hare, said Jeanette, holding up a strand of hers. Amy smiled. She looked back over the lake. The sun was shining, and the threads of light glittered on the surface of the water. She wondered suddenly if this was the lake where her dad had stopped all those years ago to take the family photo, the one where they had all been laughing. She was about to ask Jack whether he thought it was that as well, when she remembered the more immediate fact that her dad was leaving for Japan she checked for the clock, 5 hours. I think whether it's a rabbit or hare, she said, pressing the button to return the Turbochaser to its car shape rather than dinghy one. It's a good luck omen. Let's get going. Return to the highlighted route, said the sat-nav. You are currently in a lake. You are currently in a lake, said Jack, evidently back to his usual self. Amy drove up on the shore of the lake and into the field. Then she turned towards a gate beyond which it looked like there was a lane leading north. Mobilicon XR207 located, said a robotic voice which sounded like it was coming somewhere above them. Mobilicon XR207 located. The children looked at each other. What was that? Said Amy, frightened. Was it the rabbit? Said Jeanette. Maybe it's a rabbit speak. It came from the sky, said Raoul. They all looked up to see hovering about 3 meters above them a black shining disc powered by 4 tiny fans. 2 small red lights on the front of it blinked at them like devil's eyes. Drone, drone, shouted Jack, and they all dived for cover.